Divorced mom laughed at her $1 inheritance. Next day, lawyer drove her to a hidden estate. Amanda Lewis had grown used to silence. Not the kind that filled the house after her daughter fell asleep or the quiet hum of the early morning before her shift at the diner, but the kind of silence that echoed inside her. The kind that came from broken promises and years of absence, especially from the man who should have been her first protector, her father. At 39 years old, Amanda's life was a tightly wound rhythm of survival. She lived in a modest two-bedroom apartment in the outskirts of Seattle, juggling 2 jobs just to make rent. In the mornings, she poured coffee with forced smiles at a bustling downtown cafe. In the evenings, she worked behind the register of a local pharmacy, counting pills and dealing with the weary faces of strangers who, like her, were just getting by. Her daughter, Lily, 10 years old and far too perceptive for her age, had learned not to ask why mommy was always tired. Amanda had stopped believing in miracles a long time ago. After her husband left 3 years earlier, taking their joint savings and a chunk of her trust in people, she swore she'd never expect anything from anyone again. The divorce had been messy, filled with custody hearings, false promises, and bitter silences. In the end, she got what mattered most, full custody of Lily, but at the cost of her emotional reserves. One gray Tuesday morning, as Amanda was folding Lily's laundry before rushing off to work, a cream-colored envelope arrived in the mail. Her name was typed in block letters, the kind of formal font that usually meant bills or bad news. She opened it without thinking. It was from a law office in Portland. Cold, official. The words hit harder than she expected. "We regret to inform you of the passing of your father, Mr. Gerald Lewis." There was a pause in her breath, like her lungs had skipped a beat. It had been over 20 years since she'd heard his voice. He disappeared from her life when she was 16, after a fight with her mother so bitter it shattered whatever fragile family bond had existed. Amanda had waited years for a call, a letter, anything. It never came. And now he was gone. She sat down on the edge of the bed, the paper trembling slightly in her hands. Lily peeked around the corner, sensing something was wrong, but Amanda forced a smile and waved her back into the kitchen. Later, when the girl was at school, Amanda allowed herself a single tear, not because she missed him, but because the finality of his death sealed a door that had always remained slightly ajar in her heart. A week later, she found herself in a high-rise office building downtown, the smell of polished wood and legal documents thick in the air. The law firm was clean and cold, like the kind of places she never felt welcome in. A receptionist offered her tea she declined, and then she was led into a room with heavy bookshelves and an older man in a tailored gray suit sitting behind a desk. "Ms. Lewis," he said, standing slowly and extending a hand. "I'm Richard Whitman, your father's attorney." Amanda shook his hand cautiously. "I didn't know he had one," she replied, her voice clipped. "Understandable. Mr. Lewis kept many aspects of his life, compartmentalized." That word struck her. Compartmentalized. Like she had been a drawer in a cabinet he chose never to open again. Whitman opened a folder and removed a single-page document. He looked at her for a moment before reading aloud, "To my daughter, Amanda Lewis, I leave the sum of exactly $1. Amanda blinked. A sharp silence filled the room. Then she laughed, not out of amusement, but out of disbelief. A short, bitter chuckle that escaped before she could stop it. $1, she repeated, half to herself. He couldn't even pretend to care? Whitman didn't answer immediately. He let the moment settle, watching her carefully. Then he closed the folder and placed it gently on the desk. "I understand your reaction. But I'm going to ask you to return tomorrow morning. There is something else, something your father instructed me to show you in person. He was very specific about it." Amanda leaned forward. "What is it?" "I'm afraid I can't say." "Not yet," he said, standing. "But I assure you, Ms. Lewis, it's not what you think." She narrowed her eyes. "I'm not in the mood for cryptic games, Mr. Whitman." "I understand that," he said gently. "But if you can spare a day, I believe you'll find the journey worthwhile." Amanda stood slowly, unsure whether to feel insulted or intrigued. Her father, the man who'd vanished from her life without explanation, had left her a single dollar, and a mystery. She had no idea what kind of game he was playing, even from beyond the grave. But part of her, the part that still remembered waiting by the phone when she was 17, that still hoped for closure, couldn't walk away. "I'll be here tomorrow," she said flatly, and left without shaking his hand. Outside, the Seattle rain tapped lightly on her coat as she stood on the sidewalk, the letter still folded in her bag. The city moved around her in its usual blur, but Amanda felt slightly detached, as if something long buried was beginning to surface. She didn't know what the next day would bring. But for the first time in a long while, she felt the faint pull of curiosity through the numbness. She couldn't shake the feeling that $1 was never meant to be an insult. It was an invitation. Amanda barely slept that night. The rain had intensified after sunset, drumming relentlessly against her apartment windows like a question she couldn't answer. In the dim glow of the hallway light, she paced back and forth long after Lily had gone to bed. Her thoughts ran in loops, pulled between anger and confusion, bouncing from fragments of memory she hadn't revisited in years. Her father had left her $1. One single dollar. She had laughed in that office, but now that laugh tasted sour. She could have ignored it. She could have thrown the document away, chalked it up to another reminder that he had never truly been her father. But something about Whitman's tone lingered in her mind. There had been no sarcasm, no smugness, just quiet certainty. He had said it wasn't what she thought. Amanda hated puzzles, especially the emotional kind, but there was something about that lawyer's gaze that made her feel like a door had opened, one she didn't even know existed. By the time the morning crept in through the blinds, Amanda was already dressed. Lily sat at the kitchen table, her legs swinging as she ate cereal from a chipped bowl. "Where are you going today?" the girl asked between bites. Amanda tucked her blouse into her jeans and forced a lightness into her voice. "Just some paperwork I need to sign. I won't be long." "You didn't sleep," Lily said plainly. "I'll sleep tonight," Amanda replied, brushing a hand through her daughter's hair. "Promise." By 9 o'clock, Amanda stood once again in front of the high-rise law office. She half expected to walk in and find the whole thing had been some elaborate prank, a misunderstanding, or a cruel footnote in a story that was already too painful. But Whitman was there, waiting for her, his briefcase on the desk and a calm, practiced smile on his face. "Ms. Lewis," he greeted, standing. "Thank you for coming back. You said I needed to see something. In person." He nodded and gestured for her to sit. "We'll be taking a drive. It's a few hours outside of the city. If you're ready, we can leave now." Amanda narrowed her eyes. "What exactly are we driving to?" "I'm not at liberty to say just yet," he replied. "Your father left very specific instructions. I'm simply carrying them out." "Why all the secrecy?" Whitman folded his hands. He believed that the only way for you to understand was to experience it. Amanda didn't like that answer. It felt like more emotional manipulation from a man who had mastered the art of abandonment. But curiosity had taken root, and now that it was there, it wasn't letting go. Against her better judgment, she followed him. The car was a sleek black sedan, pristine and silent as it moved through the traffic. They drove in silence for a long time, the city gradually giving way to the suburban sprawl, then to long stretches of forested roads and weathered highway. Amanda kept checking her phone, but the further they drove, the more the signal bars disappeared. Eventually, her screen went blank. "How much longer?" she asked. "About 30 more minutes," Whitman answered without checking a map. Amanda crossed her arms, staring out the window. The trees blurred past, tall and old, the kind of dense forest she hadn't seen since childhood. The air grew colder as they climbed a slow incline, and the landscape turned quieter, more isolated. No buildings. No people. Just pine and fog. Finally, the car turned onto a gravel road barely wide enough for the vehicle. It snaked between thick trees, the branches arching overhead like a tunnel. Then, after several long minutes, they came to a rusted iron gate half buried in overgrown vines. It looked ancient, untouched, as though it had been forgotten by time. Whitman stopped the car and stepped out. He pulled an old-fashioned key from his coat pocket and walked to the gate. Amanda followed, her boots crunching against the gravel. The gate groaned as it opened, a low, metallic wail that sent a chill down her spine. Behind it, a dirt path led up to a clearing, and there, rising from the mist, stood a house. It wasn't a mansion. It wasn't grand or impressive in the way wealth often tried to be. It was a modest farmhouse, 2 stories tall, with whitewashed wood siding and a wide porch that wrapped around the front. The windows were intact. The roof was clean. There was no sign of decay, despite its isolation. Amanda stared at it, frowning. "What is this?" "This," Whitman said softly, "was your father's second property. Unknown to most. Maintained privately for the last 22 years. Amanda's stomach twisted. Why was it hidden? Whitman turned to her. "He left no direct explanation for that. But he did instruct me to bring you here as soon as possible after the reading of the will." She walked slowly up the steps, each creak of the wood beneath her feet echoing too loudly in the morning air. Whitman unlocked the front door and pushed it open. The inside was immaculate. Wooden floors, polished furniture, a fireplace that still smelled faintly of ash. There were books on the shelves, photographs in frames, some of landscapes, others of people she didn't recognize. Everything was preserved, not abandoned. It didn't feel like a place someone had forgotten. It felt like a place someone had been waiting to show her. "This house is in your name now," Whitman said. "Along with its contents. Everything has been transferred." Amanda turned slowly, heart pounding. "He left me $1. That was the symbolic portion of the will," he said. "Legally required, but intended to ensure you came here." She shook her head. "This doesn't make sense." "I agree," he said. "But there's more. He left behind a message for you. A private letter, locked away in the study." Amanda followed him down a hallway lined with framed photographs, none of which she had ever seen before. The study was a small room with deep mahogany walls and a large desk facing a window that looked out onto the forest. Whitman handed her a small brass key. She hesitated, then inserted it into a narrow panel on the wall behind the desk. With a soft click, a hidden compartment slid open. Inside was a single envelope, yellowed with time. Her name was written on the front in careful cursive. Amanda took a breath and opened it. The letter was written in her father's unmistakable hand. The moment her eyes met the ink, a strange tightness gripped her chest. The first line read, "Amanda, if you're reading this, then I've finally managed to do something right." Her knees weakened, and she sat down hard in the leather chair. The words that followed weren't an apology, not exactly, but they weren't cold either. He spoke of regrets. Of watching her from afar. Of choices he didn't know how to fix once they were made. He wrote of nights he stayed in this very house, walking through the forest just to feel closer to her, even if she never knew. She clutched the paper in trembling fingers, her vision blurring as the words wrapped around her like a memory finally taking shape. Gerald Lewis hadn't left her $1 out of spite. He'd left her a map. Amanda stood in the middle of the study long after Whitman had stepped out to give her privacy. The house felt as if it had exhaled around her, revealing some sliver of a life that had been hidden in shadows. Her hands trembled slightly as she folded the letter and slipped it back into its envelope. She didn't cry, not exactly. The tears never fully came. What she felt was stranger than sadness. It was a gnawing awareness that her father had been something other than what she had believed for over 20 years. And yet she wasn't ready to forgive him. Not yet. The study, with its heavy drapes and scent of cedar, held an odd familiarity she couldn't explain. She traced her fingers along the edge of the desk, stopping at the indentation where he must have rested his hand countless times. There was a subtle indentation in the leather of the chair. A hollow in the carpet where his boots might have always landed. This room had been his sanctuary, and now it was hers, too. By the time she stepped back into the hallway, the late afternoon sun was pouring in through the windows, casting long beams of light across the wooden floor. Whitman was standing near the front door, looking through a document on a clipboard. When he saw her, he straightened. "I assume you read it," he said gently. Amanda nodded. "It's not what I expected." "No," he said. "I didn't think it would be." She leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "Why this place? Why not a phone call? A letter years ago? Why make it all so theatrical?" Whitman lowered the clipboard. "Some men spend their entire lives hiding from their guilt. Your father wasn't ready to speak when it mattered. I believe he thought this was the only way you'd listen." Amanda exhaled slowly. He was right. Whitman gave a faint smile. "There's something else. He asked that I spend the night here with you, to answer any questions you might have. And there are practical matters, ownership paperwork, property details, things we should review before I return to the city." Amanda hesitated. She didn't want him here. Not because he had done anything wrong, but because she didn't know how to process what she was feeling, and his presence reminded her too much of the man who'd caused it. "I'll stay in town tonight," he added quickly, sensing her reluctance. "There's a bed and breakfast about 5 miles from here. But if you're willing, I'll return in the morning. We can go over the documents then." "That's fine," she said. I need to be alone here." "Of course." He handed her a small folder. "This has the deed, keys to the shed out back, and the alarm code, though the system's quite old. Your father insisted on maintaining everything himself. There's also a generator in case of outages, and some contact information for the groundskeeper who used to check in once a month." Amanda took the folder and walked him to the door. As he stepped outside, Whitman paused. "Ms. Lewis. I know this isn't easy. But this place, it was more than a house to your father. I think you'll find that the truth isn't as simple as absence." She didn't answer. She only nodded and closed the door behind him. The silence that followed was deep, but not empty. Amanda turned slowly, the folder pressed to her chest, and began walking through the house room by room. The living room had a stone fireplace and a faded rug beneath a pair of armchairs that looked well used. The kitchen was small, tidy, stocked with preserved goods and neatly labeled jars. A hallway led to 2 bedrooms upstairs. One of them had clearly been his, books stacked neatly on the nightstand, a flannel shirt hanging from the back of the door, shoes lined under the bed. The other room was barely furnished, a twin bed pushed against the wall and a small dresser with an empty mirror. She sat on the edge of that bed, thinking of how many nights her father must have spent in this place, alone, hiding from the world, hiding from her. The idea that he had watched her from afar, that he had stayed connected in secret, made her feel something she couldn't name. Not anger. Not relief. Something in between. Later, as the sun sank behind the trees, Amanda stepped out onto the porch. The forest around the house was dense but serene. The air was cool, filled with the scent of pine and earth. She walked down the steps and followed a narrow path that led behind the house. A small shed stood in a clearing, the padlock rusted but functional. She used one of the keys from the folder to open it. Inside, the shed was meticulously organized. Gardening tools, cans of paint, boxes labeled with dates. One wall was lined with shelves full of photographs. Amanda stepped closer, heart pounding. They were photos of her. Not posed or framed, but candid, dozens of them. Her as a child, in parks, at school, playing in the backyard of their old house. Photos she didn't remember being taken. In many of them, her father could be seen in the distance. Sometimes just a shoulder, a hand, a shadow behind a tree. Watching, never approaching. There were more recent ones too, her with Lily, at the grocery store, at a playground, outside their apartment building. Amanda stared, the weight of it pressing down on her like a tidal wave. He had followed her life from the sidelines. He had watched his granddaughter grow up without ever speaking to her. It was all here, frozen in time, like he'd built a secret archive of a family he no longer belonged to. Amanda's knees buckled, and she sat heavily on a stool beside the shelves. The tears came then, slow and quiet, carving hot lines down her cheeks. Not because of what he did or didn't do, but because of what he clearly wanted and couldn't have. Regret. That was what filled these photos. Not obsession, not control, regret. As darkness settled over the property, she closed the shed and walked back toward the house. Her legs felt heavy. Her mind, heavier still. That night, she didn't sleep much. She lay in the unfamiliar bed, the letter on the nightstand beside her, and stared at the ceiling. She kept trying to put the pieces together. Why keep this place a secret? Why never write? Why never call? In the early hours of the morning, as the world outside turned blue with dawn, she got up and made herself coffee in the old kitchen. The machine still worked, surprisingly. As she sat at the table, staring at the steam rising from her mug, she realized something. She didn't know her father. Not the man he became. But she was beginning to. And somehow, that terrified her more than the idea that he had abandoned her. Because if he hadn't truly abandoned her, if he had stayed close, even in silence, then her whole life had been shaped by a misunderstanding. And that meant everything she thought she knew about him, and about herself, might be wrong. Amanda awoke on the second morning with the heavy sensation of displacement. The room around her was quiet, washed in the pale light of dawn. Outside, the forest was still blanketed in mist, and the air that seeped through the cracked window smelled of moss and wood smoke. Her body felt unrest, but her mind pulsed with urgency. She dressed in silence and made herself a modest breakfast from the pantry, black coffee and a slice of bread with some preserved fruit spread she found in the back of a cabinet. Everything in the kitchen, like the rest of the house, felt curated with care. It didn't reflect wealth or extravagance, but rather a kind of disciplined simplicity. Whoever her father had become, he had not lived in chaos. When Amanda stepped outside, the morning air clung to her skin, sharp and invigorating. The gravel driveway stretched beyond the trees, and the rusted iron gate stood faintly in view, marking the edge of this strange world. She hadn't paid much attention to the surrounding land the day before, overwhelmed as she had been by the house and the letter. But now, as she wandered further from the porch, she noticed paths, small trails winding through the property, some lined with wooden markers or overgrown stepping stones. She followed one that led around the side of the house, beyond the shed and past a narrow stream. Birds chirped high above, and fallen leaves crunched underfoot. Eventually, the path opened into a clearing where a dilapidated bench sat beside a low stone wall. The wall looked older than the house itself, overgrown with ivy and moss. She brushed some of it aside and found a small inscription carved into the stone, E.L., G.L., 1992. Amanda froze. The initials jolted her like cold water. Her father's, obviously. G.L. But E.L., who was that? She crouched down, inspecting the inscription more closely. The carving was crude, clearly done by hand, but it had been protected from the elements by the thick growth. She sat on the bench and stared at the wall, feeling the earth beneath her boots and the question rooting itself deep into her chest. There was more to this place. Back inside, she searched through the living room shelves. Most of the books were well-worn classics, survival guides, and woodworking manuals. A few journals lined the lower shelf, but they seemed untouched, blank pages stacked between aged leather covers. On a whim, Amanda lifted one of the photo albums tucked away behind the firewood stack. The photos inside were older, from the late 80s or early 90s, her parents together, smiling stiffly in front of a house she didn't recognize. Some of the images were taken here on the property, her father chopping wood, standing by the shed, sitting on the porch. But none included her mother. And none included Amanda. Then, on the very last page, tucked in the plastic sleeve behind a faded photograph, she found a folded sheet of notebook paper. She pulled it out carefully and unfolded it. The handwriting was distinctly feminine. "Gerald, I know you think you're doing the right thing. But this house holds too much of us, and you're not ready to let it go. Be careful. She'll find the truth one day, and when she does, I hope it sets her free, not breaks her. There was no signature. But Amanda didn't need one. El. Who was this woman? And what had she meant by, "She'll find the truth"? Amanda didn't know whether to feel angry or afraid. The letter hinted at secrets kept not only from her, but also from others. Was El her father's partner? A friend? Someone who had helped him maintain this property in silence? The answers weren't in the house. Not in the obvious places, at least. So she returned to the bench near the stone wall and began clearing the area more thoroughly. The wall itself extended in a jagged line, as though it had once enclosed something larger. She followed its perimeter and soon discovered the remnants of a small garden, wooden beams forming a square, barely held together by rusted nails. Inside, weeds had overtaken everything, but Amanda could still make out the faint shape of what had once been planting rows. Who had tended this? She noticed a birdhouse nailed to a nearby tree, the paint faded but the structure intact. It had initials carved into its base as well, El. The woman hadn't just passed through, she had lived here, or at the very least, left her mark deliberately. Amanda sat back on her heels, brushing dirt from her hands, and tried to piece it together. Her father had built a life here, or part of one. And someone else had shared in that life. But where was she now? Why had Amanda never heard of her? Why had her father never spoken of her existence? That evening, Whitman returned as promised. Amanda met him at the porch, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. "I need answers," she said before he could even greet her. He followed her into the house, and they sat at the dining table as she spread the photographs, the note, and the folded album page in front of him. "Who is El?" Whitman stared at the items for a moment before exhaling slowly. "I was wondering how long it would take." "You knew about her?" "I knew of her," he said carefully. "Your father mentioned her in passing during our meetings, but never in detail. Her name was Eleanor. Was she his, what? A partner? A friend?" "I believe she was both," he said. "She lived nearby. Your father bought this land years before he disconnected from your family. Eleanor helped him maintain it. From what little he shared, they had a deep understanding. Not a romantic one, at least not in the conventional sense, but a connection born from similar grief." "Grief?" Whitman nodded. "Eleanor lost a daughter. Around the same time your father lost you, in a way. He told me once that Eleanor understood his silence better than anyone." Amanda absorbed that in silence, staring at the stone wall through the window. "Why didn't he ever tell me about her?" she asked. "I suspect he wanted to protect what little of her remained here. She passed away nearly 10 years ago. Cancer, I believe." Amanda felt her breath catch. A woman who had shared her father's exile, who had written warnings into the cracks of his life, was gone before Amanda ever knew she existed. "And the initials on the wall?" she asked. "The stone bench, the birdhouse?" "He built those in her memory. I remember he asked me to file paperwork for a private plaque to be added there, but he changed his mind. Said it was better if it remained unspoken." Amanda leaned back in her chair, her mind a swirl of ghosts. "There's something else," Whitman said, pulling a folder from his satchel. "Your father didn't just own this house. There's more land, several acres, some of which are technically still unregistered. He asked that I show it to you when you were ready." Amanda took the folder and flipped through the survey maps, deed transfers, and notes written in her father's hand. There were trails he had marked, areas where he had cleared paths, plans for cabins that were never built. This wasn't just a retreat. It had been a vision. A future he'd never had the courage to complete. As the sun dipped below the horizon once more, Amanda stood at the edge of the porch, staring out at the woods. She had come here thinking she was inheriting a joke, a dollar meant to mock her. Instead, she had uncovered a life built in shadows, shaped by grief, and preserved in silence. The gate had rusted shut behind years of separation, but now, it had opened into something else entirely. Not closure. Not yet. But a beginning. The third night in the house brought with it a kind of strange quiet Amanda hadn't felt in years, not the numb silence of exhaustion or the wary calm that came from survival, but something heavier and older. The forest wrapped itself around the property like a secret, the trees swaying gently in the wind while the old farmhouse settled into the earth with tired groans. Every sound within the walls carried weight, as if the house itself was holding its breath. Amanda stood in the study again, late into the evening. The envelope containing her father's first letter lay beside the lamp, corners now slightly worn from being opened and closed so many times. She had read it a dozen times, searching for more meaning in the lines, in the pauses, in the spaces between words. But her father had said only what he had wanted to say, and nothing more. She leaned against the edge of the desk, her eyes drawn once again to the patterns in the wood grain, the careful arrangement of items on the shelves, the meticulous order that surrounded her. And yet, something gnawed at her. Something small but insistent. A tension she couldn't name. There was more in this room. She was sure of it. Her gaze swept the walls again. The study was modest, with only a few shelves, the large desk, and a standing globe in the corner that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. The walls were paneled in dark oak, each plank tightly fitted, but her eyes caught on one panel just to the left of the window, slightly discolored at the edges, barely noticeable, but different. She stepped closer and ran her fingers along the seams. It gave under pressure. Not a door, not a drawer, but a recessed section of the wall that clicked open when pressed at a precise angle. Inside, she found a shallow cavity about the size of a shoebox. Tucked inside were a small leather-bound journal, a sealed envelope, and an old metal key attached to a faded green ribbon. Amanda's heart pounded as she pulled the contents out and laid them on the desk. She opened the envelope first. The handwriting on the front was familiar, but slightly shakier, written with age or trembling fingers. "If you found this, Amanda, you're ready." There was no greeting, no date. The letter jumped straight into what he had clearly hesitated to share before. "There are things I never told you, not because I didn't trust you, but because I didn't trust myself to explain them without making things worse. Your mother and I, what we went through, it broke something in both of us. But only one of us stayed broken." Amanda's eyes narrowed as she read, the paper trembling slightly in her hand. "When you were 6 years old, I tried to fight for custody. I hired lawyers. I wanted to be part of your life. But the terms your mother proposed were impossible. She made me choose, sign over custody without contest, or she would reveal something that could have destroyed the career I had at the time. I don't know if she ever would have done it. But I believed she might. I believed she'd do anything to erase me from your world." Amanda's breath caught in her throat. "I don't tell you this to make you hate her. That's not what I want. She protected you in the way she knew how. Maybe she thought keeping me out would keep you safe. Maybe she was wrong. But I need you to understand, I didn't leave you because I wanted to." There was a pause in the text, a space where no words came. "The key in this letter opens the back study cabinet in the attic. Eleanor used to keep records there, documents your mother never knew existed. I kept them hidden. I didn't want to revisit that pain. But you should decide for yourself what's true." Amanda lowered the letter slowly, her eyes burning with heat. The attic. She hadn't been up there yet. In all her exploration of the house, the trapdoor in the hallway ceiling had remained untouched. It was easy to miss, tucked above the back staircase with a thin cord dangling just within reach. A few minutes later, flashlight in hand, Amanda climbed the narrow wooden ladder and pushed the hatch open. The attic was dusty, lined with old trunks and stacked boxes, but dry and surprisingly well kept. Cobwebs hung like forgotten banners between the beams. She found the cabinet quickly, a wide, low chest tucked beneath the eaves. The metal latch was rusted, but the key fit snugly. With a twist, the lock clicked open. Inside, dozens of envelopes, folders, and journals were packed in tightly, many labeled in precise handwriting. She pulled out a thick folder marked, "Custody, 1992, and sat cross-legged on the wooden floor. The documents inside made her stomach turn. Typed statements. Legal briefs. Witness notes. Letters from her father's lawyer. And a notarized letter from her mother, detailing stipulations that bordered on blackmail. Amanda read each line with increasing disbelief. Her mother had threatened to disclose false claims about his conduct, his mental health, even suggestions of abuse that had no basis in reality. There were no police reports, no evidence, just a threat that, in the early 90s, could have ruined a man's career and reputation beyond repair. The agreement was clear: if he surrendered custody without public dispute, she would keep her silence. He signed. Amanda sat in stunned silence. Her entire life, she had believed her father simply left. Chose not to fight. Let her go. But that wasn't the truth. He had fought, quietly. And he had lost, not because of a lack of love, but because of fear. Not for himself, but for her. She opened another envelope. Inside was a photo of her, no more than 8 years old, playing with a stuffed bear in the front yard of their old home. The photo had been taken from a distance. In the corner, handwritten in ink, were the words, "She still smiles." That's all that matters. Amanda closed the folder, her body numb. She sat there a long time, staring at the sloped wooden beams above her, listening to the creaks of the house as the wind passed over the roof. He had watched her grow from afar because he was kept away. He had left not because he didn't care, but because he thought disappearing was the only way to protect her. Back downstairs, Amanda sat at the kitchen table with the documents spread out before her. She could barely breathe. Her childhood, her anger, the entire foundation of her understanding, it had shifted in the span of a single evening. She didn't know how to process the betrayal. But she knew one thing. When she returned to Seattle, there would be a conversation she had waited her entire life to have. And this time, she would demand the truth from the one person who had taken it from her. Amanda sat at the kitchen table long after the sunrise had faded into a mid-morning haze, staring at the scattered documents and letters that lay before her. Her hand trembled as she reached for the leather-bound journal she had found hidden in the wall. The words she had uncovered in the attic, her father's heartfelt confession of a custody battle clouded by manipulated threats, had already turned her world upside down. Yet, she knew it wasn't over. Secrets still lingered in the house that seemed to hold the echoes of everyone who had ever lived there. The journal's cover felt soft and worn in her hands. It had belonged to her father's, and her eyes fluttered as she opened it to the first page. The handwriting was neat and deliberate, turning gradually more shaky as she flipped through the entries. The earliest pages reflected a man struggling to stay connected to a daughter he barely recognized, even in memory. But as she continued, the tone shifted. There were entries full of quiet regret, of longing. Then came an entry that took her breath away. He had written about the day, one of the rare days, he visited her when she was a child, of how he watched her from a distance at a playground, in the shadows of an old oak tree. He described her laughter then, her small hand waving at him even as she didn't realize he was watching. He had stayed hidden when she turned, fearful that acknowledging his presence might unravel whatever fragile world she had built with her mother. And she had smiled at him anyway, unaware that she was nearly offering him the entirety of her trust in that moment. Tears sprung unbidden to her eyes. He had watched, but he hadn't dared step into her life. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. It was Whitman, stepping inside gently, seeing the open journal and the tears on her cheeks. He closed the door quietly behind him, respecting the stillness. "How are you holding up?" he asked, his tone grave but caring. Amanda closed the journal and clasped it to her chest. "It's too much," she whispered. "All of this, it's more than I can process." He nodded slowly, stepping closer. "You don't have to. But there's more, Amanda. I only revealed what you've seen so far because he asked me to. There's another part of his legacy, something he wanted you to understand before he felt peace." Amanda looked up, her eyes red-rimmed. "What is it?" Whitman pulled out a sealed envelope from his inside pocket, handing it to her. Her name was written on it in the same cursive as the earlier letter. Her hands shook as she slid it open. Inside, there was a single page, a will amendment dated just a year before her father's death. In it, he specified that the property and its contents were to be preserved, not sold or divided, to ensure that the story of the place, and the people who lived there, remained intact. But there was one line that struck her dumb. In the event my daughter elects to restore this house, not just live in it, but to restore, to honor what was, she will find that the house holds what she cannot see now. Her heart pounded. What could that possibly mean? Whitman guided her to follow him through the house. They walked in silence, passing through rooms she had explored countless times before. At his prompting, Amanda turned toward the fireplace hearth in the living room. She knelt and ran her hands across the smooth stones. "There's something else," Whitman said, crouching beside her. "Your father always maintained that the house would talk to you if you listened. That something in its walls would reveal itself." He pressed gently on one certain stone, and it shifted. A hidden lever clicked, and with it, a secret panel pushed open to reveal a small metal box. Amanda opened it and found several old letters inside. One was from her mother, written long before the divorce. It spoke of Eleanor, of a friendship built on shared loneliness, of how Eleanor had helped her father in this house when medical bills and grief left her stressed beyond words. The tone was one of raw appreciation and sorrow. Eleanor had been the only person who stayed when others walked away. Another letter was from Eleanor herself. It was dated shortly before her death and addressed to Amanda, though Amanda had never known of its existence. Eleanor wrote of watching Amanda grow, of loving her as if she were her own child, and of the hope that the house would one day bring them together again in truth, not silence. Amanda clutched the letter to her heart, tears spilling freely. Eleanor had cared for her father, for years, even from a distance. Whitman stood beside her in quiet solidarity. "He wanted you to find this," he said softly. "He wanted you to know not just of his regrets, but of the people he cared about, who cared for you too." The weight of it pressed around her like the walls themselves. The inheritance had been more than dollars or deeds, it was a conduit of truths that had long gone unspoken. "What do I do now?" Amanda asked, her voice trembling. "You follow their wishes," Whitman answered gently. "Restore. Preserve. Tell the truth, and let this place be the bridge to what was always missing." Amanda looked up at the ceiling beams, the light through the windows dancing on the walls. She saw not abandonment, but a tapestry of love, regret, and hope threaded through the house itself. She clenched the letters, her breathing steadying. She would restore the property, not for profit, not for closure, but for truth. Because in these hidden chambers, in the letters and memories, she had found something she had never truly believed in: redemption. And for the first time, she felt, despite everything, that it was within reach. Amanda spent the following days moving through the house as if it were a living organism, listening, watching, following its cues. Each creaking floorboard, each mark in the wood, every photograph or item tucked behind furniture seemed to carry intention, as though her father and Eleanor had left behind a trail not just of objects, but of truths to be uncovered. Her perspective had changed. What once felt like a mausoleum of regret now pulsed with the possibility of understanding. She had already found letters, journals, photographs, and legal documents, layers of history folded into walls and drawers. But with each discovery, new questions emerged. Why had Eleanor kept such a detailed watch over Amanda's life? Why had her mother never spoken of her friendship with Eleanor? And how much of the past had been deliberately erased? On the fourth morning, Amanda sat at the dining table with Lily on a video call. Her daughter's voice was a soothing sound amid the storm of her thoughts. "Are you okay there, Mommy?" Lily asked, munching on a cracker. "You look like you're inside a ghost story." Amanda laughed gently. "It sort of feels like one. But not the scary kind. The kind where people leave behind pieces of themselves, hoping someone will find them." Lily blinked at the camera. "Like treasure maps?" "Exactly like that," Amanda said. "Except the treasure is the truth." After the call ended, Amanda returned to the room that had once been Eleanor's. It was the spare bedroom upstairs, barely furnished when she arrived, but now that she looked closer, she noticed subtle differences from the other rooms. The paint on one wall had been touched up more recently. The corners of the floor were less dusty than the rest. Something had been moved, cleaned, adjusted. She pulled the dresser away from the wall and noticed a seam in the floorboards, one that didn't match the rest. Using a small flathead screwdriver from the shed, she pried the floorboard open and found a canvas-wrapped parcel inside. Her hands worked carefully as she unrolled it on the bed. It was a collection of old diaries. Not her father's. These were Eleanor's. The covers were soft with age, the pages brittle but legible. Amanda flipped through them slowly, her heart pounding as she recognized names: Gerald, Amanda, even Amanda's mother, written in casual, familiar tones. Eleanor had documented it all. She wrote of her close friendship with Amanda's mother during their youth, how they had both fallen in love with the same man, Gerald, but in different ways. How she had accepted her role as a confidant when he married Amanda's mother. How she had stayed close even after the divorce, especially as Amanda's mother began to emotionally unravel from the weight of bitterness and fear. One entry, dated shortly after the divorce, struck Amanda like a slap. Gerald is broken. He comes here at night to sit on the porch and cry. I told him he had to fight, but he's afraid of losing Amanda completely. Her mother threatened him. I believe her. She doesn't want her daughter near him, not because she's protecting her, but because she cannot bear to see him move on. I told him he should leave, start fresh, but he stays. He stays for Amanda. Another entry detailed how Eleanor helped Gerald maintain the property, how they kept it as a sanctuary, not just for themselves, but as a future place for Amanda, should she ever want to know who her father really was. He still thinks she'll come. One day. Even if it's after he's gone. He built the stone bench with her initials. I told him she might hate him forever. He said that if she does, at least she will hate him with the truth. Amanda wiped at her eyes, overwhelmed by the clarity of Eleanor's voice, by the intimacy of her perspective. These diaries weren't just reflections, they were confessions from someone who had loved quietly, supported steadfastly, and remained a silent witness to a fractured family's tragedy. But there was more. In one diary, Eleanor referenced a safe box in town, one she kept at the local bank in her own name. Inside, she claimed, were copies of letters she had written but never sent. Letters to Amanda's mother. Letters to Amanda herself. Letters explaining everything. Amanda knew what she had to do. The next morning, she drove into the small town 15 miles away, the closest community to the property. It was a modest, quaint place, with one gas station, a diner, a hardware store, and a single bank that bore the name Eleanor had mentioned. She approached the front desk and explained that she was the daughter of Gerald Lewis and that she believed Eleanor Mayfield had left a deposit box here under instructions. The teller raised an eyebrow. Eleanor Mayfield? That name hasn't been mentioned around here in years. She was a friend of my father's, Amanda said. I found her diaries in his home. She referenced a box. The teller checked records, then excused herself to speak with a manager. After a short delay, she returned with a key card and asked Amanda to follow her. Inside the vault, the teller handed Amanda a small metal box. There's a document you'll need to sign confirming receipt. This box was set to transfer to the closest living relative or named beneficiary in the event of Eleanor's death. Your father was listed, but after his passing, the default transferred to you. Amanda signed, her fingers tingling as she carried the box into a private viewing room. She opened it slowly, heart thudding. Inside were several envelopes, each labeled in the same delicate cursive she had seen in the diaries. Some were addressed to her mother. Some to Gerald. One was addressed to Amanda. She picked it up and opened it, unfolding the neatly creased paper. My dearest Amanda. If you're reading this, then the time has come. I have always believed you would return to the place your father built for you, even if it took years. I do not know if you hate him, or if you hate me for being part of this story. But I hope you will understand why I stayed silent. I was not your mother, but I loved you as if you were mine. I watched you grow through photos, through Gerald's quiet stories, through the ache in his eyes when he spoke of you. He was not perfect. neither was your mother. But you were never forgotten. If this truth hurts you, I am sorry. But know that your father spent every breath trying to make something right from what had shattered. Love. Eleanor. Amanda pressed the letter to her lips, her shoulders shaking. She returned home just before dusk, carrying the box and its contents like a relic. That night, she read every letter by lamplight, drinking Eleanor's words like water after a long drought. The clues had multiplied, and with each one, the story grew more complete. Her life had been shaped by choices made in secrecy, but now, those secrets were undone. And Amanda was finally seeing not just what had been lost, but what had been waiting all along. Amanda didn't return to Seattle right away. Every time she thought about packing up and leaving the estate, something pulled her back. The diaries, the letters, the photographs, they had created a gravity that held her in place. But it wasn't just the documents. It was the atmosphere, the subtle warmth that seemed to rise from the walls now that she understood more of their history. The house no longer felt like a monument to abandonment. It felt like a story mid-sentence. And still, she had not explored everything. The property extended far beyond the house. On the fifth day, Amanda followed a path behind the garden that wound through a thin strip of pine trees and opened into a smaller clearing where an old greenhouse stood, its frame half collapsed and the glass fogged with time. She had passed it several times before but hadn't looked closely. Now, with Eleanor's letters echoing in her mind and her father's quiet devotion revealed, Amanda felt compelled to step inside. The greenhouse was overgrown but intact enough to offer protection from the weather. Rusted gardening tools lay scattered on a small workbench, and several clay pots sat cracked and buried under vines. In the center was a wooden crate, sealed but not locked. She pried it open. Inside were dozens of photographs. These were different from the ones in the house or the shed. They weren't just of her childhood or her father's solemn gaze from afar. They were snapshots of her mother, smiling, laughing, lounging barefoot on the porch with Eleanor, planting flowers near the bench Amanda had seen earlier. There were also pictures of the three of them, Gerald, Eleanor, and Amanda's mother, together in a way Amanda had never seen before. Warm. Familiar. Intimate. And then came the photo that brought Amanda to her knees. It was of her, at maybe 3 years old, in Eleanor's arms. They were sitting on a swing under a tree, Eleanor's eyes crinkled with laughter, Amanda's face tucked into her neck. There was no distance, no formality. Just affection. Amanda didn't remember the moment, but the expression on her face told her all she needed to know. This woman had loved her. This woman had held her, laughed with her, protected her, not just as a bystander in her father's life, but as someone who had once been part of her life, deeply and directly. Why had her mother never told her? Amanda sat down hard on the dirt-covered floor, the photo still in her hand. The flood of memory, emotion, confusion, it swept over her like a crashing wave. All this time, she had believed her father had simply walked away. She had believed Eleanor was a stranger, that this house was a place of secrets built in isolation. But the truth was far more complex. They had all been connected once. Her mother had erased it. The questions now screamed louder than ever. Why had she been made to forget? Back inside the house, Amanda found herself pacing. The letters from Eleanor had hinted at conflict, at unresolved grief and bitterness. But this photo, this undeniable proof, spoke of something more deliberate. Something cruel. There had been a time when Amanda had been surrounded by people who loved her, and that time had been wiped clean like chalk from a slate. That night, sleep didn't come. She sat in the study, the photo framed now on the desk beside her, staring at it as if it could speak. Outside, the wind rattled the trees, but inside the air was still. Around 3 in the morning, Amanda made her decision. She would go back to Seattle. Not just to resume life, not to return to the grind of work and caretaking and bills, but to confront the one person who still held pieces of this story. Her mother. Amanda arrived in Seattle the next afternoon. The apartment felt foreign after days at the estate. She hugged Lily, tried to smile through the weight she carried, and waited until her daughter was asleep before calling her mother. "I need to see you," Amanda said. Her voice held no emotion. No invitation for excuses. Her mother hesitated on the other end of the line. "Is everything okay?" "No. But we're going to talk anyway." The next morning, Amanda walked into her mother's apartment with the envelope of photos and letters tucked tightly in her bag. Her mother, Judith, sat on the sofa, looking older than Amanda remembered, maybe because Amanda now saw her not just as a parent, but as a woman capable of shaping and hiding an entire narrative. Amanda didn't sit. She pulled out the photo from the greenhouse and set it on the coffee table. Judith looked at it, her face going pale. "Where did you get that?" "From the house," Amanda said. "The one Dad left me. The one you said he abandoned me from." "No," Amanda said sharply. "You don't get to start with denial. That's me. That's Eleanor. And that's a time in my life you pretended never happened." Judith's mouth opened, but the words didn't come. Her eyes filled, but she didn't wipe them. "Why?" Amanda asked. "Why erase her? Why erase them?" Judith finally exhaled, her voice a rasp. "Because I was afraid. Because I hated how much he needed her. How much she gave him that I couldn't." Amanda stood frozen. "So you punished me?" "I protected you," Judith snapped, the first flash of her old fire returning. "That woman wasn't your family." "She held me," Amanda said, lifting the photo. "She loved me. And you buried that. You buried her." Judith's eyes dropped. Amanda continued, her voice cracking. "You told me he left. That he didn't fight. That he didn't want me. He wanted her more than us," Judith muttered. "I couldn't live with that." Amanda's hands trembled. "So you told him he'd lose everything. You threatened him with lies. You made sure he disappeared. You destroyed his chance to be a father." Judith didn't deny it. The silence stretched for a long, long time. Amanda gathered the rest of the documents from her bag, the court papers, the letters, the photos, and laid them out on the table. "I came here to hear your side," Amanda said. "And I got it. You were angry. You were jealous. And you punished him by erasing half of my life. I spent years believing I was unwanted. Do you know what that does to someone?" Judith finally looked up, and for the first time in Amanda's life, she saw something close to regret. Not guilt, Judith never asked for forgiveness, but regret, heavy and immovable. "I can't change what I did," Judith said. "No," Amanda replied. "But you can stop lying." Judith didn't respond. Amanda took the photo and placed it back in her bag. "I'm going to rebuild that house," Amanda said as she stood. "Not just the walls. The truth. The history. All of it. Lily deserves to know who her grandfather was. She deserves to know who Eleanor was." She paused at the door. "You can be part of that. But only if you tell her the truth." And then Amanda left. Outside, the air felt different, lighter, but charged. She had ripped through a veil that had covered her entire childhood, and now, for the first time, she could breathe. There was more pain ahead, more healing needed, but she was no longer chained to the lie of abandonment. She was walking back into her father's legacy, not to rewrite it, but to reveal it. And nothing would stop her now. Amanda returned to the estate under a sky weighed down by heavy clouds, the kind that looked like they were deciding whether to break open with rain or simply hover in stillness. She felt the same way, restless, full of pressure, and waiting for something to release. The confrontation with her mother had left her with a raw kind of clarity. There was no going back to the version of the past she had grown up with. The only path now was forward, through whatever truths remained hidden. That night, the house greeted her not as a stranger, but as an ally. She moved through it deliberately, not to search but to reconnect, to walk once again through the story that had been unraveling in fragments. She sat at her father's desk, the photo of Eleanor and herself now resting in a frame beside the lamp, and began sifting through the drawers with a different purpose. She had already found so much. But something still lingered in the back of her mind. Her father's letter from the wall had mentioned legal documents. The idea that he had tried to fight for her, only to be pushed back into silence, was a wound that still hadn't stopped bleeding. And yet, Amanda needed more than memory and implication, she needed proof. Hard evidence that the man she had been told walked away had, in fact, stood his ground until it nearly destroyed him. She pulled open the lowest drawer, one she hadn't explored deeply before, and found what appeared to be tax records, utility bills, old bank statements, all bundled and labeled with meticulous care. But in the very back, stuck behind a stack of manila envelopes, was a thin wooden box, its lid unlatched. Inside were a few yellowed pages, some paperclips, and a single notarized document, an original copy of a legal contract dated nearly 3 decades earlier. Amanda sat back in the chair, heart hammering. The heading was clear: Petition for Joint Custody, Lewis vs. Lewis, 1992. Her father's signature was at the bottom, written in the steady hand she had come to know. Her mother's name was there too, alongside a handwritten addendum stapled to the back, terms scribbled hastily in what Amanda recognized as her mother's handwriting. It was a list of conditions, each more brutal than the last. If Gerald agreed to relinquish joint custody and cease all contact attempts, Judith would refrain from publicly disclosing a series of allegations. None of them were grounded in official charges, but each was damaging enough to end his career and sever his access to Amanda through reputation alone. It was blackmail, plain and brutal, masked behind the language of maternal protection. But there was something else. A letter, folded and tucked into the contract, handwritten by Gerald and addressed to no one in particular, perhaps never meant to be sent. I thought I could fight. I thought if I just stayed quiet long enough, something would shift. But the longer I wait, the more I lose her. My daughter is not a bargaining chip. She is not a threat. She is the only part of me that ever mattered. If giving her peace means letting her hate me, then I will bear that. Amanda pressed her hand over her mouth. It wasn't just that he had tried, he had sacrificed. Not to protect himself, but to protect her from the war her parents had turned their love into. He had chosen silence so she wouldn't grow up in the middle of a battlefield. But the result was the same. Amanda had grown up in confusion, misled by one parent and cut off from the other. She carefully returned the letter to the box, her movements reverent, and closed it with trembling fingers. She would scan and preserve every page. These were no longer just family documents. They were a record of injustice, a map back to a truth that had been stolen from her. Later that afternoon, Amanda stepped outside to walk the property again. The storm that had threatened earlier held off, but the air was damp and thick, the kind that made every sound carry. She found herself back at the stone bench, now cleared of overgrowth and debris, where her father had carved their initials. She ran her fingers along the edges of the letters, thinking of everything she had learned. The initials didn't feel symbolic anymore. They felt real, grounded in effort and heartbreak and hope. She sat in silence, the estate stretching out before her like a forgotten country finally rediscovered. Then, something caught her eye. At the far edge of the woods, just beyond the tree line, she saw a glint of metal, barely visible beneath a cluster of pine needles and overgrown ivy. Curiosity pulled her toward it, each step cautious. As she reached the spot, she knelt and began pulling away the debris. It was an old boundary marker. The kind used to designate private land, barely standing anymore, its sign rusted and unreadable. But Amanda recognized the initials engraved into the corner, GL. She followed the perimeter, counting her steps. It was more land than she realized, stretching beyond what had been documented in the visible maps. Her father had spoken about undeveloped acres. Eleanor's diaries had hinted at trails, hidden places. Amanda realized now that he had kept parts of the estate even more private than she had imagined, not to hide them from her, but perhaps to protect their meaning until the time was right. She turned back toward the house and felt something shift inside her. This wasn't just a property. It was a legacy. And legacies weren't made from inheritance alone. They were made from sacrifice, from choice, from the determination to leave something behind that could outlive pain and misunderstanding. Amanda returned to the house and began sorting everything into piles: letters, photos, court documents, maps. Her mind moved faster than her hands. She was beginning to see a shape form in the chaos. Her father had tried to preserve his version of the truth in fragments. Now it was her task to reconstruct it. But she would not do it in secret. That evening, she called Whitman and asked him to come to the estate. When he arrived the next morning, Amanda had a binder ready. "I'm going to open this place," she told him as he stepped into the study. "Not just to preserve it. To share it." He raised an eyebrow. "You mean as a historical property?" "No," Amanda said. "As a place for women like me. Women who've been broken by lies, by betrayal, by the silence of the people who should have protected them. My father didn't get to raise me. But this house raised something in me I thought I'd lost. I'm not selling it. I'm rebuilding it." Whitman sat across from her, taking in her words. "I think he'd be proud of that," he said after a long pause. "I think he was always trying to get me here," Amanda replied. "One way or another. And now she was here. Not as a visitor. But as the steward of a legacy finally unburied." Amanda waited several days after her initial confrontation with Judith before returning. She needed time to organize not just the documents she had found, but the storm of thoughts that refused to settle. The discovery of the custody agreement, her father's unsent letters, Eleanor's journals, and the boundary markers on the property had created a new landscape in her mind. And if she was going to face her mother again, she needed to do so not with rage, but with resolve. She wanted the truth. Not excuses, not rewrites. The truth as only her mother could tell it. She arrived at the apartment in the late afternoon. Judith answered the door slowly, her movements stiffer than before. Amanda noticed the tension in her mother's shoulders, the defensiveness that hadn't faded. "I didn't expect you back so soon," Judith said, stepping aside. "I didn't come to fight," Amanda replied. "But I'm not leaving until you tell me everything." Judith closed the door and led Amanda to the small kitchen table. The same place they had shared breakfasts years ago. Where Lily had once scribbled with crayons. Where birthday candles had flickered and wine glasses had been filled during more civil years. But now, the table was bare. The room was quiet. Amanda placed a folder on the table and opened it. Inside were photocopies of the custody agreement, the letter her father had never sent, and the photo from the greenhouse, of Amanda in Eleanor's arms. Judith glanced at the contents but said nothing. Amanda leaned forward. "No more silence," she said. "I deserve to know the real story. Not the one you told me. Not the one you edited. The real one." Judith stared down at the documents, her fingers twitching. "I never meant to hurt you," she said finally. Amanda didn't blink. "But you did." There was no accusation in her voice, just certainty. And that seemed to do something to Judith. The older woman reached for the photograph and held it, her thumb tracing Amanda's tiny face. "You don't remember those days," Judith said quietly. "I don't. But I know what this picture means." Judith looked up. "It wasn't always the way you think. Gerald and I, we loved each other. We tried to build something real. But after you were born, it got harder. He became distant. Obsessed with his work. With his failures. I felt like I was raising you alone, even when he was in the room." Amanda listened without interrupting. She knew there would be bias, memories twisted by time and emotion, but she wanted every version of the story. "He started going to that house," Judith continued. "At first, he said it was for space. Then, I found out Eleanor was there." "You knew her?" "Yes. We were friends once," Judith said, her voice tightening. "Back in college. Before Gerald." Amanda felt the sting of that revelation. "You never told me that." "Because it didn't matter," Judith snapped, then caught herself. Because it hurt too much. Amanda leaned back. She helped him. She helped you. You were there together. There are pictures. Judith nodded slowly. It's true. She was around in the beginning. But after the divorce, everything changed. Gerald, he wasn't the man I married anymore. He wanted to take you. Said I was unstable. Said Eleanor could help raise you. He tried to get joint custody, Amanda said. You threatened him. Judith's mouth thinned. I was scared. You were vindictive. Judith looked away, her face crumpling slightly. I didn't want to lose you. So you made sure I lost him. The silence that followed was sharp and painful. Amanda pulled out another letter, Eleanor's last, the one addressed to her. She handed it to Judith. Her mother read it in silence, her expression unreadable. I didn't know she left something like this, she said. She left a lot, Amanda replied. More than you ever gave me. Judith folded the letter carefully and placed it back on the table. I wasn't always fair. I know that. But I loved you. Everything I did was to protect you. From what? Amanda asked. From a man who wanted to love his daughter? From a woman who treated me with kindness? You were my whole world, Judith said, her voice breaking. And he had already taken so much from me. Amanda stood. Her hands were steady now, her breathing even. I came here to hear you say it, she said. That you kept him from me. That you let me grow up believing a lie. Judith didn't answer right away. But after a long pause, she nodded. Once. Small. I did, she whispered. I let you believe he walked away. I didn't think you'd ever find out. Amanda swallowed the lump rising in her throat. Well, I did. And now I'm going to do something with it. Judith looked up, surprised. What do you mean? I'm restoring the house, Amanda said. I'm going to make it into a place for women like me. Like you, maybe. Women who were broken by silence. Women who need space to put themselves back together. Her mother stared at her. You'd really stay there? In that place? I already have, Amanda said. And I'm not staying for him. I'm staying for me. For Lily. For the truth. Judith's eyes filled with tears. I wish I could change it. You can't, Amanda said gently. But you can stop pretending. You can be part of the truth, or you can keep living the lie. She turned to leave, then paused at the door. You still have time to be honest with Lily, she said. Don't do to her what you did to me. And then she walked out. Outside, the sky finally opened, rain falling in slow, deliberate drops. Amanda didn't rush. She walked through it with her face lifted to the clouds. She had come for answers, and now she had them. Ugly. Complicated. Painful. But true. And in truth, there was finally room for peace. Amanda returned to the estate under an evening sky streaked with pink and gold. The rain had passed, leaving behind the scent of wet earth and pine, and for the first time since she'd arrived at the house days ago, she didn't feel like a visitor. She was the rightful heir now, not of wealth, but of truth, of legacy, of grief and love intertwined in ways she was only beginning to understand. The property no longer felt like a hidden relic from a past life. It felt like the future. She unlocked the door and stepped inside. The quiet welcomed her like a familiar embrace. She went straight to the study and opened the desk drawer, taking out the folder with her father's amended will, the letters, the photos, all of it arranged and documented. She was preparing to scan everything, to archive it digitally, to ensure no piece of this story would ever be lost again. She was halfway through organizing when her phone buzzed. The caller ID read, Whitman. She answered immediately. Did something happen? There was a pause before the lawyer spoke. Amanda, I need you to come to the office tomorrow morning. There's something unusual we need to go over. What kind of unusual? I can't explain it fully over the phone. But it pertains to your father's estate. There was a second clause in the will, one that was sealed and time-sensitive. We were instructed not to reveal it until after a certain set of conditions were met. Amanda stood slowly. What conditions? You've met them, Whitman said, his voice oddly steady. You found the house. You read the letter. You stayed. Now it's time for the rest. Amanda was silent for a long moment. I'll be there in the morning. The call ended, and she remained still, the silence of the house around her suddenly heavy again, but not with sadness, with anticipation. The next morning, Amanda arrived at Whitman's office shortly after 9 o'clock. The receptionist led her to the same wood-paneled conference room where the initial reading of the will had taken place. The weight of that moment, the disbelief, the bitterness, the laughter at the single dollar left to her, felt like a different life. Whitman entered the room a few minutes later, carrying a sealed envelope and a leather briefcase. He sat across from Amanda, eyes serious. I need to start by saying this isn't typical, he said. Your father left very specific instructions about when this clause could be revealed. It was locked behind a conditional trust, one that would only be activated if you physically visited the estate, remained on the property for no fewer than 7 days, and located the letter in the study wall. We received confirmation from our own team that all conditions have been fulfilled as of yesterday. Amanda folded her hands on the table. And? Whitman opened the envelope and handed her a set of documents. Amanda read the first page. Then again. Her eyes widened. What is this? She asked. It's the remainder of your father's estate, Whitman said. The house was never the entirety of your inheritance. It was just the beginning. She scanned the pages in disbelief. The numbers didn't make sense at first. Then they did. There were asset listings, multiple investment accounts, 2 of which had matured over the past 2 decades, property holdings in Oregon and Northern California, a trust account under her name that had been locked until now. The total net worth exceeded 7 figures. This can't be right, Amanda whispered. It is, Whitman said. Your father was never poor. He chose a quiet life after the divorce, but he made smart investments. Lived well within his means. Maintained his retirement accounts and continued working in private consultation. Quietly. Anonymously. Amanda stared at the figure. Over $2 million? $1.8 million, after taxes and property fees, Whitman confirmed. Your father created a hidden portfolio designed to grow over time, not to be touched unless the terms were met. He wanted you to come to the house. To stay long enough to understand him. Only then did he believe you were ready to inherit what he built. Amanda sat back in her chair, stunned. The single dollar had never been an insult. It was bait, one last gesture to force her to confront the truth. He left no letter with this, she asked. There's one more, Whitman said, opening the briefcase and handing her a folded sheet. Amanda opened it slowly. The handwriting was shakier than before, clearly written in his final days. Amanda. If you're reading this, then you stayed. That's all I ever wanted, for you to stay long enough to understand what I couldn't say in life. I left you the house so you'd see the truth with your own eyes. I left you the stories, the letters, Eleanor's words, because I knew you wouldn't believe me alone. But I also left you this, security. Not because I think money solves anything. It doesn't. But because I wanted you to be free. To not have to choose between survival and peace. To live with space to think, to grow, to become who you were always meant to be, without being trapped by bills and exhaustion and fear. Use it well. Not to fix the past. But to build something better. For you. For Lily. For the women who carry stories like yours. Love. Dad. Amanda's throat closed. She couldn't speak. She folded the letter carefully, pressed it to her chest, and closed her eyes. It wasn't just wealth he had left her. It was a message. She drove back to the estate in silence. The road passed beneath her tires like a ribbon unspooling, each mile a step further into the reality she was still struggling to accept. She pulled into the gravel driveway and sat for a moment before getting out. The house stood before her, its frame solid, its porch wrapped in sunlight. The wind moved through the trees, and Amanda imagined for a moment that she could hear his voice, faint and warm, buried in the rustle. Inside, she opened the ledger she had begun, her plan for the future. The retreat center. The space for mothers and daughters. A place for healing. A place where truth was never hidden behind locked drawers or sealed letters. Now, it wasn't just a dream. It was possible. And she would honor every sacrifice that made it real. Amanda spent the next few weeks immersed in both vision and memory. The inheritance was more than financial, it was directional. It wasn't just a safety net. It was momentum. It allowed her, for the first time since Lily was born, to breathe without fear of drowning. She no longer had to calculate rent versus groceries, daycare versus overtime. The anxiety that had been welded into her bones over years of financial hardship began to loosen its grip. And with that release came a singular question: what would she do with this rare, hard-earned freedom? She walked the property often, mapping out ideas in her head and in notebooks. The house needed work, certainly. Some of the plumbing was unreliable, the roof had sections that would need reinforcing before winter, and the guest room floors creaked like they might give way beneath heavy steps. But structurally, it was solid. Her father had kept it alive. Maintained it, quietly, for decades. Perhaps he had known, even then, that one day it would serve a purpose larger than him. Larger than the grief that had built it. She began meeting with local contractors. A woman named Sherry from the nearest town came out to do a walkthrough. She was in her 50s, sharp-eyed and honest, with a thick braid of gray hair that swung when she walked. "So," Sherry asked, looking over her clipboard, "you're not planning to sell, are you?" "Not even close," Amanda replied. "Good," Sherry said. "Too many places like this get flipped into vacation rentals. Would be a shame." Amanda hesitated before speaking. "I want to turn it into a retreat space. For women. Especially mothers. Single mothers, women leaving abusive situations, people who need rest, even if they can't afford it." Sherry's eyes lifted from her notes. "That's not what I expected you to say." "I didn't expect to say it either," Amanda admitted. "But the more I uncover about what this place meant to my father, and to me, the more it makes sense." Sherry nodded. "You're going to need zoning permissions. And upgrades. It'll take time." "I'm not in a rush," Amanda said. "This isn't about speed. It's about doing it right." That night, Amanda sat on the porch as the sun dipped below the trees. The forest line burned orange in the last light. She had a fresh folder open on her lap labeled "The Foundation." It was still just a working title. But the ideas were coming fast now. Cabins along the back ridge. A communal kitchen built onto the west side of the house. A greenhouse where Eleanor's had once stood. Small cabins, nothing fancy, just warmth, privacy, quiet. Rooms where women could rest. Walk trails. Write. Sleep. Breathe. She began drafting a mission statement, the words pouring out faster than she could organize them. This land was once a secret. A place held in silence, steeped in grief. It was a home built by a man silenced by love, and a woman who loved in silence. Now, it becomes something else, a sanctuary of truth. A place where women come to rebuild. Not because they are broken, but because they deserve peace. The next morning, Amanda brought Lily to the house for the first time. The girl stepped out of the car with wide eyes, taking in the towering trees, the wraparound porch, the blue-gray paint that was beginning to peel at the corners. "This is where Grandpa lived?" she asked. "Yes," Amanda said. "And now, it's ours." Lily wandered ahead of her, touching the railing, poking her head through the door, exploring without fear. Inside, Amanda showed her the room she had already prepared, the one that had once belonged to Eleanor. It was cleaned, painted soft lavender, the window overlooking the garden. "Can I really stay here?" Lily asked, her voice tentative. Amanda knelt in front of her. "As often as you want." That afternoon, they cooked together in the kitchen using the old stove. They laughed when the smoke alarm went off after Amanda burned the toast, and Lily mimicked her panicked face for the rest of the day. Amanda hadn't felt this kind of joy in years. Not forced, not fleeting. Real. Later, as Lily slept upstairs, Amanda received a call from her mother. She stared at the screen for a long time before answering. "Hi," she said cautiously. "I've been thinking," Judith said on the other end. "About what you said. About Lily. About the truth." Amanda said nothing, letting the silence invite more. "I want to help," her mother continued. "Not just with her. With the retreat. With the house. I don't expect forgiveness. But I want to be a part of what you're building, if you'll let me." Amanda leaned against the window, watching the trees sway. "You can come visit," she said carefully. "Start there. Let Lily get to know you on her own terms. If it goes well, we'll talk more." Judith exhaled. "Thank you." After she hung up, Amanda sat alone in the living room, the fireplace crackling softly, the walls echoing with the soft weight of what was becoming a new story. Her story. It wasn't redemption. Not yet. But it was repair. Honest. Earned. Quiet. And in that quiet, Amanda saw a path forward. The next week, she submitted paperwork for a nonprofit. Hired an architect. Met with a therapist willing to offer monthly services on site. Set up a website. Drafted a newsletter. Created a list of potential donors and foundations that might support her vision. The retreat had a name now, Eleanor's Porch. It would begin with 3 cabins, then 5. A main lodge. Garden plots for food and therapy. Weekend workshops. Story circles. Space to be. Amanda had finally found hers. And now, she would create space for others to find theirs too. The summer sun fell in long golden streaks across the lawn as Amanda stood barefoot on the porch, her fingers wrapped around a mug of warm tea. The breeze danced through her hair, carrying with it the scent of lavender from the garden Eleanor once tended. The porch boards creaked gently beneath her feet, wood her father had walked, sat on, cried on. It was the same porch Amanda had first stepped onto as a stranger to this place. Now, she could not imagine herself anywhere else. Behind her, laughter rang out. Lily's. Clear and bright, the sound wrapped around the house like a hymn. Amanda turned and smiled as her daughter skipped barefoot through the hallway, her drawing pad tucked under one arm, her curls bouncing with each step. "You coming, Mom?" Lily called out. Amanda took a final sip of tea, set the mug down, and followed her inside. The main living room had been transformed. What was once a silent study of grief had evolved into a communal gathering space, soft rugs, bookshelves, photos of women who had already visited Eleanor's porch and written notes of thanks pinned along a memory wall. In just 2 months since opening the retreat to its first visitors, Amanda had received more than 24 applications from women seeking refuge. Most had come and gone quietly, their names not shared, their stories held in privacy. Others left behind letters, journals, sometimes even art, marks of their transformation. The retreat was growing, but Amanda didn't feel overwhelmed. Not in the way she used to feel when life was one long sprint toward the next paycheck. Now, her steps were slow and steady. Intentional. The inheritance had provided the foundation, but Amanda's spirit had built the walls of what this place had become. She found Lily sitting cross-legged on the floor in what used to be the upstairs guest room. It was now a creative space for kids. Crayons, paint, glue sticks, and jars of collected leaves and pine cones filled the shelves. Lily held up a drawing of the house, complete with a wraparound porch, trees, a garden, and 3 little cabins nestled along the edge of the paper. "Can we hang this next to the guest book?" Lily asked. Of course, Amanda said, brushing her daughter's hair behind her ear. It's perfect. Later that afternoon, Judith arrived. It had been 3 weeks since Amanda allowed her mother to visit. They had spoken on the phone nearly every other day, navigating their damaged relationship with cautious curiosity, like two people learning to speak a shared language after years of miscommunication. Judith stood at the bottom of the porch steps, a basket in her arms. I brought scones, she said with a tentative smile. Amanda stepped down to greet her. Is that bribery? Judith laughed, genuinely, if nervously. It's survival. They sat on the porch together, watching Lily run barefoot between the garden rows. Judith passed Amanda a napkin and leaned back in her chair. This place is not what I expected, she said. It's beautiful. And full of something I can't quite name. It's full of people who were tired of pretending they were fine, Amanda said. People who needed a place to feel safe, even if just for a weekend. Judith nodded slowly. That used to be me. Amanda didn't answer. She didn't need to. The silence wasn't cruel anymore. It was honest. After a few minutes, Judith reached into her bag and pulled out an envelope. She handed it to Amanda. I found this in an old box last week. I hadn't seen it since before the divorce. Amanda opened the envelope and pulled out a photograph. It was of her parents, young, smiling, standing in front of the very house Amanda now owned. Eleanor stood beside them, a basket of vegetables in her hands. Amanda herself was just a baby in the photo, barely visible in her father's arms. I think we were all happy then, Judith said. For a little while. Amanda studied the photo. What happened? Judith sighed. We let our pain speak louder than our love. That's what always happens when no one's willing to listen. Amanda placed the photo on the table. Well, I'm listening now. Judith looked out across the garden. Thank you. For letting me be here. You're not forgiven yet, Amanda said softly. But you're welcome. That night, Amanda stood once again on the porch, this time alone, the moonlight laying soft silver across the landscape. The cabins were quiet. The garden rustled gently in the wind. The porch light glowed behind her, casting a warm halo around the door. She thought of her father, of the way he had loved in silence, and the legacy he had built out of guilt and hope. She thought of Eleanor, of her gentleness, her quiet resilience, and the way she had given Amanda love from a distance, never asking for anything in return. She thought of Judith, of the woman she had once feared, now softened by time and accountability. And she thought of herself. The woman she had become. No longer defined by abandonment or exhaustion. No longer scrambling for scraps of peace. She was rooted now. Present. Alive. Amanda sat on the swing Eleanor had once built, the chains groaning softly as she moved. Lily joined her a few minutes later, climbing up beside her. Do you think Grandpa would have liked me? Lily asked, her voice sleepy. Amanda looked at her daughter and smiled. He would have loved you. More than anything. They sat in silence, the stars bright above them, the air cool and gentle. I'm glad we came here, Lily whispered. Amanda wrapped her arm around her daughter and pulled her close. Me too. As the wind carried the scent of cedar and old soil across the yard, Amanda closed her eyes. She had found what she never thought possible, not a new beginning, not exactly. But a home inside herself that had been waiting for her all along. And in that home, she would live. Fully. Fiercely. Freely. At last. The story was never about the dollar. It was about the path it opened. The laughter, the pain, the letters, the legacy. And the love that remained, quiet, steady, eternal.